Leading change is the most important skill that any leader can develop because leadership is leading change. You see, if you're not leading change, you're not leading anything. You're just managing the status quo. Before COVID-19, managing the status quo simply meant you were effectively going backwards. It was more theoretical. Today, it's far more serious because for so many of us, the status quo doesn't exist anymore. We leaders are now having to lead our people, our departments, our organizations through a prolonged phase of uncertainty and volatility. And I talk about leading in a VUCA world in more detail in a separate video. I don't have to tell you that this pandemic has made life much tougher for large swathes of the population. Lockdown has been stressful enough for people with large houses, gardens and savings in the bank. It's been devastating for so many others. Mental health issues such as depression and anxiety have skyrocketed. The use of food banks is now through the roof again. 500,000 people downloaded a major charity's suicide app in the last 3 months alone, more downloads than they had received in all of the last 3 years. And actually, it's likely to get worse. We can expect a sharp increase in unemployment in a few months' time, a slew of companies going to the wall, a dramatic increase in inequality, and a second COVID wave likely to be upon us in the winter, just in time for Brexit. What happy thoughts. Talk about change. We've also entered a new era in which virtually all Western governments will be turning a little Japanese. So it's an era of rapidly expanding government debt. The UK's will expand by at least $300 billion next year. The US debt alone could be $2 trillion higher. Economic growth will be lower than we're used to. The good news, I suppose, in all of this is that we have every right to expect more funding for the police, the NHS and social services, plus a complete overhaul of the entire aged care system. Not because the government has promised it, I'm not naive enough to believe campaign promises from any party, but because both sides of the House have thrown the ideology of austerity firmly into that bin of misguided ideas. The electorate won't stand for another decade of cuts, especially after COVID. I really believe that this government is firmly committed to properly funding our civil services. That's great. So the bad news is the challenges in society will get worse before they get better. And they will get better slowly. The good news is you should at least have the funding to be able to respond to it. But you will need more than funding to succeed over the next few years. You will also need leadership. And more than anything else, you will need the ability to lead change. The best leaders of change, the best leaders full stop, are three things. They are clear, they're empathetic and engaging, I've bundled those up into one, and they're trusted. Let's explore each one of those in a little more detail. First, clarity. Great change leaders are clear about what they want to achieve and just as importantly, why. And this clarity is not just about numbers. I mean, numbers are the easy bit. In some sense, you could say they're the lazy bit. Any leader can say we're going to go from a workforce of X to a workforce of Y, or an X% increase in revenue, or a Y% decrease in cost. That isn't strategy, that's just numbers. People need the narrative to go alongside the numbers. What sort of services will you be providing in the future? What sort of force do we want to become? What will be different in the future? What outcomes are we actually trying to achieve and why? Why is important because people don't change because they're told to. Your officers know this better than anybody. People only change because they want to. So the job of any leader is to help people to want to change. See, if you simply tell your people to do something different, the first questions that will instantly come into their heads will be firstly, what? They'll need clarification. Secondly, it'll be why. They will need to know why you're asking them to change. Why is critical. If your answer is beats me, the order just came from above, I guarantee their hearts won't be in it. And the end result is bound to be adequate at best. And the third question they'll ask is how? How do I do this? Well, it isn't always possible. The best change leaders don't instruct their people on how to deliver the change. They don't micromanage. They help them to work it out themselves, how best to deliver the change. The British Army is brilliant at this. Their leadership philosophy, mission command, is clear and it's focused on outcomes. There's sort of three levels to it. Firstly, every leader is trained to be clear about the outcomes that need to be delivered. and they are trained to ensure that this is clear 2 levels below them. The second thing is, it's critical that people also understand the second level, the higher outcomes, the higher reason for the command in the first place, and that's the why. And the third part of the philosophy is not to micromanage. It's to realize that every strategy changes in the heat of the battle. So to trust your people to deliver because they know what needs to be delivered and why it needs to be delivered. Let me give you a little example of this. An officer in the army gives a command to blow up a bridge. Well, that's simple enough. But he also explains why. He explains the second level outcome. We want to blow up the bridge in order to, and they're really key words, in order to disrupt the enemy's supply chain. This way, if, in the heat of the battle, his people are unable to completely destroy the bridge, they look for another way to disrupt the supply chain if they can, completing the higher mission in the process. As I've found in business over the decades, leaders not only stop at go and blow up the bridge, but they then pay their people half their bonus for only blowing up half of the bridge. The higher level reason for the command, the disruption of the enemy supply chain, wouldn't have even been mentioned, let alone achieved. Right, that's the first one about clarity. Now I want to talk about being empathetic and engaging, because good change leaders listen. They listen because they know that they don't have all the answers. That often their people know how to change things better than they do. It makes sense, doesn't it? And they're just telling people to deliver, will deliver suboptimal results. When people are involved in the process of how to deliver, then they develop a sense of ownership of the change and they become committed to delivering better results as a consequence. But more than listening, good change leaders also ask the right questions because they care. They ask, is it clear to everyone why this change needs to happen? Is it clear to you? Tell me more. How do you feel about this change? What are your concerns with the change? This is really important. And then how should we together, how can we mitigate those concerns? What are the implications of the change and what do we have to do to make this change successful? Just by asking those questions in that order, pausing for answers and discussing them, you will then have not only a better solution, but people who are committed to delivering the change. They do it to ensure their people are fully behind the change and are ready, willing, and able to deliver. The third trait of a successful change leader or successful leader, they're the same thing, is the most important leadership trait of all, and that's trust. Trust takes much longer to build than it does to destroy. We all know that from our own experiences. And people follow good change leaders because they trust them. They trust their motives. That's really important. They trust what they say. They trust them to tell the truth. They trust them to be looking after the best interests of their people and the organization, not just themselves. You see, trust evaporates when leaders appear to be more interested in themselves than they are in the people or their organization. It evaporates when leaders seem to be constantly spinning facts to make themselves look good. It evaporates when leaders obfuscate and don't tackle important matters head on, or when leaders dodge difficult questions. It evaporates when leaders are all talk and little action, when their actions don't match the rhetoric. Trust evaporates when leaders look for others to blame. Genuine leaders own their decisions, even when they turn out to be wrong. They don't blame anyone when things go wrong, apart from themselves. Genuine leaders own poor decisions and share the plaudits of good decisions. Trust evaporates when leaders are unable to learn from their mistakes, often because they're unable to admit that they made one. Trust also evaporates when leaders don't or aren't able to explain why, the reason for the change. And obviously, trust evaporates when leaders do the wrong thing, but it evaporates twice as fast if they then try to cover it up. It also evaporates, finally, when leaders aren't honest, when they're not authentic. Because being wrong isn't a problem, not owning up to it, and then not correcting it, that is. You see, we see just about every one of the above in so many politicians at the moment. So a little trick that I've developed is think of a politician or a world leader who you believe evaporates trust almost every time they open their mouth. And then think of what they would probably do in any given situation, and then do the opposite. Leading change is the most important skill that we leaders can develop. And to me, successful leadership boils down to clarity, empathy, engagement, and trust. For more about this topic, I recommend taking a look at one of the other videos in this series. It's the Essential Ingredients to Successful Change, which is a romp through 10 of the key chapters of the Change Catalyst. Thank you.